Hello, thanks for tuning in to the Not the Top 20 pod, and this is the League One playoff preview. We have done the same for the Championship and League Two, so once you're finished with this one, make sure you find those and take those down as well. We're sponsored by BlackType. BlackType all season and still offering new customers a £10 free football selection if you sign up using the offer code NTT20. So have a listen to some of our expert views and see if there's anything you fancy. Give BlackType a go during these EFL playoffs. I'm Ali Maxwell. I've got George Ellick here, as always. This is our podcast, after all. And I've also got special guests, Nick Goff, who is a pro punter. Nick, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem.
And Paul Hurst, who, as discussed in the Championship episode, has quite the relationship with the playoffs. During a 10-year period, Paul, you were in the playoffs 7 times as manager with Ilkeston, Boston, Grimsby 4 times, I think, and Shrewsbury last season. And this is where things get interesting, because this time last year we were talking about your Shrewsbury team heading into the League One playoffs, having finished 3rd in the division, have pushed Blackburn and Wigan all the way. But it's not a happy memory, is it, the League One playoff final from last season?
No, thanks for bringing it up. No, it wasn't. We lost twice at Wembley last season. I think lost the Checker Trade to Lincoln as well, but obviously a fantastic stadium to get to play at, manage at, day out for the fans, but ultimately only the winning team, the winning club. So teams will be desperate to, they've had good seasons, but want to finish it off with promotion.
Yeah, you were up against one of your best mates as well that day in Paul Warren, so it was an interesting one to cover, put it that way, but didn't go the way that you wanted.
Is he still your best mate?
I still get on well with Warner. He phoned me the other day. We had a good chat. I've watched, been to the training ground. He suffered a heartbreak this year. Not probably surprising, but kept them extremely competitive until the end. But just in terms of the playoffs as a whole, I have to say, if you can be that team that gets promoted, although you've worked, trained and prepared for, maybe 3 or 4 weeks more than the teams that win automatic, but I think that one-off feeling of winning promotion at Wembley is the way to get promoted.
How much of an effect does it have on your planning for the next season? Your season is extended, other teams maybe take a bit of a break, but also very much working towards building a squad for the following season. How negative an impact does that have as a manager? No matter whether you go up or whether you stay in the same division.
No, I mean, I think you have to have 2 plans in place and be looking at different players, but you need to speak to the owner and what budget are you looking at, because clearly you're going to sign very different players. So it is a handicap in a way, and players may be interested in coming to your club if you're promoted, and totally against that if you remain in the same league. So it's a difficult scenario from that point of view.
League One this season has been an absolute whirlwind at the top and at the bottom. The relegation battle at one point, even in mid-March, had 12 teams in it, maybe even 13. In fact, I think Plymouth, who went down, were 12th in mid-March. You, I presume, have been watching a lot of this division this season with interest. It's somewhere that we might see you pop up again in your next role, I imagine.
That'd be nice, yeah. Did well last season, but ultimately that doesn't count for anything.
You're doing automatic promotion soon, I think, aren't you, as well? So.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of a bit sick in one way. I'd love to go back to Wembley. Yeah. I kind of said that when we lost against Bristol Rovers, and I kind of watched the game back. I can remember sat at home just thinking, I want to go back and I want to put it right, and I guess we did, and I've got something to try and put right again, I suppose, down the line. But yeah, it might be a little bit easier and, like I say, get a little bit longer holiday by going up automatic, and can plan quicker, I suppose. But I've seen quite a lot of League One this season. I think the right teams have been at the top of the league, from what I've seen, some impressive performances and some good games coming up.
And Nick, from a punter's perspective, this must have been a whirlwind as well, both in the well, a 4-team title race, it felt like. Although Charlton, I wasn't including in that, ended up finishing third, but also that crazy relegation battle. How did you begin to get your head around that?
I think the top half of the table this year, we can get drawn in. The relegation battle was interesting, but in terms of quality, the top 4 or 5 teams in League One this year is a bit different to a normal League One. You often get one really good team in League One. It might be a big club that have come down from the Championship and they've got a decent budget and they blitz it. We see that happen, every now and again. Or they don't blitz it. They find it quite tough, but they manage to get their way up just about. This year, Luton and Barnsley for me were absolutely exceptional teams, and Sunderland and Pompey, they're probably Premier League clubs, never mind Championship size clubs, that have gone down there and have not managed to get automatic promotion. So I think the first thing I'd like to do is give a lot of credit to Lee Bowyer and Grant McCann for being here. In a normal season, I think Charlton might have done enough to get automatic promotion. They'd not even been in the automatic talk until right at the end. They sort of squeezed their way in, but there was never a point where you really thought Charlton were going to make top 2, was there?
It's the classic, if the season was 3 games longer, maybe they would have.
Yeah, but what a superb job to have got Charlton in this season, especially, and I don't want to downplay what Paul did at Shrewsbury last year because that was a hell of a job as well, but I think this was a freakishly strong league at the top of League One this year, and I think that will be underlined when we get into next season and we see that the 3 promoted teams, whoever the third one becomes, together with Luton and Barnsley, are not in a Championship relegation battle. I wouldn't expect any of them to go back down, actually. I think this Luton team as it is now could already fit into that, sort of safely into the bottom third minimum of the Championship. They're that good. And I think this is one thing that people sometimes don't get their head around quickly enough is the jumps between divisions. They're a bit smaller in all leagues than the media like to point out. And I think that comes probably because of the gap between the Premier League and the Championship. It's just not the same between those other leagues. And if you're a good side in League One going into the Championship, we on occasion we see teams going straight through. A couple of Norwich and Southampton both did it 5 or 6 years ago, I think. If you're a really good League One side and you come in with that momentum word, you can go and really hold your own in the Championship, and this seems to be a year where that kind of thing could happen.
It's because we said last season a lot when Ali and I would talk about Shrewsbury behind Wigan and Blackburn, saying how unlucky Shrewsbury were to come up in a league against 2 such class teams, when actually in normal seasons you probably would have gone up automatically. And it seems like there's been a similar thing here, where it was like Huddersfield a couple of years ago as well, and that ridiculous Championship campaign. Obviously they ended up going up, but it just felt like they were bumped into 2 who were just so good. And it feels like Charlton here. I mean, I'm not going to get too far in Sunderland, but I think Sunderland can be fairly chuffed that they're in this. But it feels like Charlton, given the, if you think back to when Lee Bowyer and Johnny Jackson took over at Charlton, they'd just lost their manager in Carl Robinson to a team who were staving off relegation. They weren't too fussed about it whatsoever, but at the time, the form was very, very poor. They stabilised the ship with no managerial experience, got them into the playoffs, where they didn't go up. Then, yeah, exactly, where they came unstuck. And then going into this season, with the uncertainty off the pitch, with the owner looking to either sell or, some of his other ideas are absolutely balmy, but it's not a very happy camp at board level. They've brought in Lyle Taylor, a player who we knew at AFC Wimbledon was good. I think now we can see that he is a different level to this league, really, and I think probably the best, if not one of the best strikers in League One. They lost Carlin Grant in January, who was such an important player to them, and have managed to not only stabilise but kick on. I think, we talk about, when you look at the people who win manager of the season, it's normally ones who've got a promotion next to their name. But if you're doing the alternative manager of the season, I think Bowyer has to be right up there. What a job he's done.
With Wally Downs, who you talked about on the pod yesterday.
I think Campbell and Downs, the job they've done in terms of coming into a club mid-season is incredible. But what I think over the course of the whole season, if you took all the 72 managers who started the season at the beginning, I think there's a case to be made that Bowyer's done the best job of any of them. You
came up against Lee Bowyer's Charlton this time last season, and you got the better of them in the playoff semi-final. What sort of shape were they in there? Because obviously Carl Robinson had left just a few months before, and having watched a lot of League One this season, what's the difference between them then and them now?
I spoke to a couple of people about this, and I think generally they feel they're a little bit tougher as a team. I think there was a feeling that we could maybe sort of run over them last year, and that's, I don't think, the case anymore. Done extremely well. I don't want to downplay Lee Bowyer's achievements by any stretch, but it's not a massive surprise to me that they're up there with the players that they've got.
Yeah.
I think what I would say is you're never quite sure unless you're there, the difficulties off the pitch and how that can transmit, to the team and results, particularly at home games when they've had issues, certainly in the past. So it is a fantastic achievement, but it doesn't surprise me in terms of some of the players that they've got, I think. But credit, again, losing Grant, like George just mentioned, was a big loss, and he's already showing, albeit he'll be back in the Championship, I suppose. Quality, though, yeah. But yeah, he's looked a really good player, and him and Taylor as a front pair, realistically, I think everyone would agree better than League One. So that was a big strength for them. But they've been better, I think, defensively this year as well.
I've got some stats for you, Paul. 11 goals conceded in their last 21 games. That's the calendar year of 2019 so far. Automatic promotion form in 2019. I think in that 2019 table they're second. And you talked about the quality there. And I think the Lyle Taylor, Carlin Grant's departure rather is an interesting one. Taylor has almost thrived under the responsibility, but to play devil's advocate, Nick, is that not a bit of a concern that they don't seem to have anyone as good as Grant to play up front with Taylor, and maybe, although they haven't shown a drop-off in performances or results, just in terms of personnel, they've got weaker?
Yeah, I'll be the first to hold my hands up and say that I'm really surprised at how well Lyle Taylor's done. I thought he was a good player at Wimbledon, but he wasn't even in the team every single game at Wimbledon last year. He scored goals. He was obviously a handful for defenders, but he's taken his game to a whole new level at Charlton. You've got to say, fair play to him for that. I think perhaps the even more important players though at Charlton are the lads they've got on loan. They've done very well in the loan market, and Doncaster have got a couple of loan players of their own who are very important as well. And that was actually a question I was going to ask Paul, just out of my own curiosity, really. The key players on both sides in this Doncaster-Charlton game are loan players. Is there any concern whatsoever that these guys aren't going to be there next season? That maybe that even a couple of % less bothered about whether they go up or not than the lads that are on long-term contracts there? Does that even enter your head, or is it not a thing at all?
It's not a thing if they're the right characters, okay. And I would suggest that they probably are in how well they've performed and where the team is. In the team I had last season, Ben Godfrey, Dean Henderson, two that have now won promotion to the Premiership. I don't think you could have found two lads that cared more. The fact that they weren't signed permanent didn't matter to them. Yeah. They wanted to be successful, and we had a couple of more lads in there as well. So I get the point, and I know sometimes it's something that fans don't enjoy, is seeing lone players perhaps take the place of young lads coming through. But I think you're right. There's a couple of players, Bielik and Josh Cullen, have been excellent for them and very, very good footballers.
George, they started 2019, these two teams, Charlton and Doncaster, with 1 point between them in the league. They finish it with 15 points between them in the league. Charlton have that amazing form, and Donny did well to get in with a couple of clutch performances to finish the season, but did have a bit of a wobble. Can you make a case for Donny here, and what are the bookies saying? What are BlackType's prices?
The bookie, the only bookie that matters. Yeah, BlackType 8-13 Charlton to qualify, Doncaster 5-4. And in that first leg at Doncaster, BlackType a standout 29-20, so best price on Oddschecker for Doncaster to win the game at 90. Charlton 2-1 and the draw 9-4. I think the key thing here is Doncaster's home form. It has to be, because I think away from home, there's no question in my mind that they are not a top 6 team. I think that plays out over the course of the season. They've only lost 3 games at home all season, which is a huge positive. I'm a big John Marquis fan. I think that he's one of the guys you look at as being a talisman for his team, and without him, I think they would struggle a fair bit. As I say, the home advantage is interesting here, but I think Charlton are rightful favourites. When I back them at 8-13, I'm not necessarily sure, but I think when we get into talking about who could win the playoffs as a whole and whose value in the main market, that's where they may pique my interest.
Paul, Doncaster are a very entertaining team. They've scored a lot of goals this season, but they've conceded 58 goals in the league, which is considerably higher than the other teams in the playoffs. How much of that is a concern, I should say, against a Charlton team that it feels like we're all saying are very strong with key quality players and peaking at the right time as well?
It's a difficult tie. What I would say is Doncaster have done extremely well to make the playoffs. Had a very good season, quite a few standout performers. Maybe you'd expect that if you're going to finish in the position they did. I think Marcus is an obvious one, but I like Whiteman. I watched them lose against Accrington recently, and he was on the bench, came on second half, made a big difference to them. And you've got the old timer. I think he just signed a new deal in Coppinger, and I've watched, like I say, a lot of Doncaster. The amount of times that he is instrumental in moves which lead to chances. I know there's been a criticism over the years from one of his coaches, Mickey Walker, who's assistant manager, I think, there, that he doesn't score enough goals. He's got some, but I think he's one of those, if he's in front of goal, he'll happily square it for someone to...
But he always seems to make the right pass, doesn't he? The decision-making that comes from his experience.
Yeah, I mean, look, athletically, he's still in great shape, you can see that, but there's no doubt there's players that are faster, but in terms of how quick he is in his mind and his touch, I think he still could be a big player, along with Herbie Kane, who's really impressed on loan from Liverpool. I really like them as a team. Just overall, I think it's unusual if you struggle defensively that you get over the line somewhere. And I think Charlton's second best defensive record, I think they had in the league. They're actually got an even better home record than Doncaster. I think it's just really difficult to look past Charlton in this time.
We had a question actually for you, Nick, tweeted in by Ollie, and he said that Nick's preached caution about including end-of-season form in any opinion on team strength in the past. Does it bear any weight at all in his opinion coming into the playoffs, or is his opinion entirely based on the longer-term in-season trends? And he said, I'm thinking particularly in terms of Sunderland and Charlton's strongly contrasting late-season form here. And I would just add, it sounds like we're getting very close to that word momentum again.
Yeah, so what I think you have to try to separate is what is form and momentum, which can regress towards the mean in a heartbeat, with what is a change in team strength and team ability from 2 or 3 months ago. When we talked on the Championship pod about Aston Villa, they're an example for me of a team who have just got better over the last 3 months. And so, yes, they've been on good form, but form's not the most important factor there. It's that they're better at football than they were 3 months ago. I agree that Charlton are the better side of these two in this time. I've just got a little niggling doubt over Charlton that I'm not even quite sure how to explain it. It's just something in my head is telling me that this isn't the clear-cut tie that it first looked. When you looked at this tie on a piece of paper and thought Charlton ought to get through that one, I've got a few things in my head that are making me doubt that, and I might want to be with Donny actually. One thing that I would mention is that Kane and Whiteman, the two in central midfield, have both had injury spells and have come back fresh. They had a little time. I think for a while people thought Kane's season was over, and he could have gone back. Yeah. And he had 6 weeks out, whatever it was, and come back, and maybe he's just coming in fresh. I think that battle between Kane and Whiteman and Cullen and Bielik could be what decides the tie.
And Aribo as well.
Yeah, and I take on board the point about Doncaster defensively. That's the concern, and that's why they're underdogs for the tie, and Charlton are probably the slightly better side. I think this might go to the wire, though.
It's interesting if you look at Charlton's recent form. I think it's 7 wins out of their last 8, beating Scunthorpe by 4, Rochdale by 4, covering the -1 handicap at home to Luton as well. So it does feel like they've got enough firepower to really blast their way away from teams. But going back to what Ali on a previous podcast called it amateur psychology, when we're trying to second guess what footballers are thinking going into these games. For Doncaster, You look at how other teams have, whether they've had to secure the playoffs on the last day or whether or not they're known for a week or so. For Doncaster to so nearly throw away such a strong position, and then on final day to get the 2-0 win that they actually needed to get there, does that put them in a strong position where, they've got that big result they needed against Coventry and they're now here? Or is it a bit of a case of, okay, we've done, job done, we got where we needed to get to, anything from here is a bonus?
It's a case by case. That comes down to the characters and the examples that are led from the top in that dressing room. I think you could, I'm sure Paul has seen both cases of teams that have reacted in completely different ways to that.
Yeah.
So we do that amateur psychology thing. Here's a little tempter for the next one. I'm going to mention this in League Two actually.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting case in point about Newport, which we'll get onto later. I don't think you can just say there's no pressure at all on Doncaster. We've done well to get in, and we can play with no fear, because you're 3 games away from a multi-million-pound move into League One. So there has to be some pressure. Does it help a little bit for people to think you're not going to get through this? Maybe. I don't. It's different, and we won't know for sure until we watch 20 minutes of the first tie and we can see how things are playing out.
I have to say, I think, talk about psychology, Grant McCann's gone about it probably in a different way than a lot of people would if they were the manager of Doncaster. I think he said from the start that his aim was to win promotion, which when you look to book his odds at the start of the season and just generally, you'd think, well, all right, that's an easy thing to say, but you're talking almost like a fan rather than as a manager. And I think he'll have his expectations, and it wouldn't surprise me if the players think that they can do this.
They've got that nice mix, haven't they? I mean, Butler at the back and Coppinger are about as experienced as you could get at this level. Someone like Kane and maybe Malik Wilkes to an extent as well have the exuberance of young players who are playing at the best level, well, the best that they've played in the senior game at the moment, and surely destined for greater things. So it doesn't feel like they have a nice balance. Of course, you could say the same about Charlton with Pearce at the back and Solly at right back and all their fantastic young players as well. It's a difficult one to pick. I mean, we the biggest mistake we made in our pre-season predictions was underestimating this Doncaster side under Grant McCann. Based on his only managerial job before at Peterborough, it was hard to predict that he would get this Doncaster team playing in such an entertaining way and to put together a winning team as well. And so that certainly took us by surprise. I'm quite keen not to underestimate him for the second time, that's for sure. Let's talk about Sunderland and Pompey. Charlton and Donny will be playing each other for the 4th and 5th times this season after playing twice in the league and once in the cup. It's the same situation with Sunderland and Pompey, of course. Twice in the league. That was a 3-1 Pompey win at Fratton Park, with the caveat that it was 0-0 when Glenn Louvens got sent off for Sunderland, never to be seen again in a red and white shirt. And at Stadium of Light, they drew 1-1 recently. Of course, in the Checkatrade Trophy final, they went all the way to penalties. So not much to separate them so far. You've got a Portsmouth team, Paul, who essentially, aside from a run of 5 points in 8 games in January and February, that big blip, have been as good outside of that as anyone else in the division, and finished the season strongly as well. And a Sunderland side who seemed in and around the automatic promotion picture all through the season, actually lost the fewest games in the whole of the EFL, only 4 of 46, the draw being the bane of their life, and actually ended up finishing essentially 5th in a 4-horse race. So how do you analyse this one? What do you think is going to happen between Sunderland and Pompey?
I think Nick touched on it earlier, 2 huge clubs. The support that both clubs get, you saw that in the final of the Checkatrade, and I think particularly Sunderland go into this under immense pressure, I would imagine.
So you think the size of the club adds to the pressure for the players and for the management?
I think that, and just the situation that they found themselves in. Portsmouth have had their troubles in the past and are working their way back. I'm not sure, even if Sunderland win promotion, it'd be fantastic for them. But from what I hear, at least, I don't think everything's still right. Financially, there's still a lot of difficulties at the football club. So I just think that, if anything, they're probably the team under most pressure out of everyone in all the leagues to win promotion through the playoffs, and coming up against a Portsmouth team, got some very good individuals, have obviously beat them in arguably the biggest game that they've played against each other, albeit on penalties.
Yeah.
I think it's a really tough tie this to call. I've got my thoughts, and I'll be honest, I lean towards Portsmouth, maybe a little bit like Leeds. I've had a feeling for a little while that Sunderland might just not, make promotion happen, which would be a big shame. I watched the documentary. Fantastic football club, and clearly means so much. It does to every fan, I suppose, but there's no doubt that's a footballing area. I don't know. Like I say, I've got a feeling for Portsmouth on this one.
This is the perfect tie, isn't it, George? I mean, what's already come before this season, the fact that they were challenging for the title at one stage together, the size of the clubs as well. This kind of feels like the semi-final tie that we deserved. But I also saw a Sunderland fan tweeting us on the weekend saying, I'm actually fine with us dropping down to 5th and playing Portsmouth. I'd rather play Portsmouth than Charlton, which is an interesting one. I reckon the Pompey fans would probably say the same.
Yeah, I think they probably would. It's interesting hearing you say that draws have been the bane of Sunderland's life. That's definitely been the case recently, but I'd argue there were times earlier in the season where it was the draws that were getting them out of a hole, where the draws were drawing games that they easily could have lost, and that was what was keeping them in that race. I guess because we've already had the Checker Trade final, it's great we're going to have these two take each other on over 2 legs. I think that the game at Fratton, that 3-1 game, despite the sending off, I think can give Portsmouth massive hope. And I think over the 3 games, as a neutral, I think I'd be happier going into this as a Portsmouth fan. I also think there's an interesting angle with, we've spoken to Mike Holden on these pods before, who looks into the psychology of managers a lot, and I think following Jack Ross as a manager this season suggests to me that even if Sunderland are able to somehow eke their way into the final, it's going to be marginal. They're not going to go and blast this Pompey team away 5-0 over 2 legs. It's just not going to happen. And for that reason, as a punting contest, when you're trying to work out your angle, given how close the prices are, which I'll read out in a second, it's very hard to back Sunderland because you're basically hoping they're going to edge out another team by a very small margin, whereas Portsmouth, we've seen in the past, both away from home and at Fratton, have the quality and the players at their disposal to really put teams to the sword. In terms of prices, in the to qualify market, Portsmouth are 3 to 4. Sunderland odds on with every other bookmaker on Odds Checker, but 21 to 20. So BlackType really sticking their necks out on Sunderland to qualify. So if you're listening to me thinking what am I talking about, go to BlackType now and you can get the best price going. And for the game, the first leg at Stadium of Light on Saturday night, again BlackType best price on Sunderland at 13 to 10. The draw is 23 to 10, and Pompey 21 to 10.
Nick, what's your view on this game?
I think first of all, although I'm going to conclude being on the same side as everyone else on the Portsmouth side, I think they've only got themselves to blame for what happened on Saturday. They could be playing Doncaster. All they've got to do is beat Accrington at home. And I do make them slight favourites for this Sunderland tie, but they've been better off playing Doncaster. That's beyond any sort of question. But the 2 managers that come into this, I think Kenny Jackett's been in the playoffs almost as many times as Paul has. He's massively experienced Football League manager. Whereas he comes up against probably the one manager James Shan's a different case, but certainly the manager under the most pressure, as Paul said, completely agree with that, and the manager who probably loses his job if he doesn't win them. That's not the case in the playoffs often with managers. That's how important Sunderland it is for Sunderland to get promoted. Both sides here will have interesting selection issues because they've both got, especially in attacking areas, lots of options. Portsmouth, Brett Pitman's in and out of the side. They got lone strikers in, as is the fashion in January. Go and add firepower for your promotion bid. Portsmouth did that. I trust Kenny Jackett to pick the right team in these 2 games. Do I trust Jack Ross to do the same? I've got bigger question marks on them. So I have a tick in the manager box for Kenny Jackett here. I think Sunderland deserves some credit. But for an angle, I don't think people come at it necessarily from the right. Sunderland haven't been that good this year. They've been underpriced for promotion all the time because of their name. People think because they're Sunderland, they're going to come with this run. The facts were they weren't that good. But they deserve some credit for grinding it out. for keeping themselves in an automatic race when actually they weren't that good a team. So when pressure's kicked in the last 10 minutes of games, they have gone and dug themselves out of jail. They had that firepower to do it. So they deserve some credit for that. But I do think Portsmouth are slightly the better side.
On the Championship podcast, for anyone who hasn't listened, you talk about how there are certain things that Frank Lampard said about his Derby team which made you think he didn't quite know what he was doing. With me, there was a very similar thing where Sunderland opened their checkbook on the last day of January and spend a lot of money on Will Grigg when they're a team who are struggling to create chances, where they're a team who, Grigg is someone who, if you put him in a team who are creating chance after chance, he will score a lot of goals, but he's not someone who's going to create chances on his own. And so surely that whole, whilst you're obviously right and that they deserve credit for keeping pace, with me there feels like just an idea of there's a lot of money in this squad. It's been, with the likes of Aidan McGeady, you just can't really compete with at this level. But there's just not really I don't trust them in any way to have a system or a plan to understand how to outfox and get past Portsmouth over two legs, and if they do, go on to win a final.
I think, to be fair, there's a lot of Sunderland fans who have not been happy about, at different stages of the season, the style of play, the way that they progress the ball through midfield, and the way that they try and get it into their attacking players. As you say, it's not always been a team that they seem to get stuck a lot in possession, and I'm sure they've come up against teams sitting a bit deeper and maybe happier to take a point against them than other teams. But there's certainly a suggestion at different times that it's been too often, let's hope for Aidan McGeady to skip inside too and bend one into the far corner. And then in recent weeks, one of the themes has been Charlie Wyke actually playing pretty well and such a talented and effective target man at this level. You can see why Jack Ross has continually tried a 4-4-2 with Wyke and Grigg up front, and Wyke the foil for Grigg, the poacher. But a little bit like how we spoke about West Brom earlier, they've struggled to get them in their most efficient positions. They've struggled to get, and they've really suffered on the other end of the pitch with one less body in midfield. The defence at times has looked very, very shaky. So, you raise those worries, and I know that the fans have the same sort of worries.
But then to give them some credit, that the signing of Grant Ledbetter in January ended up being more important in terms of scoring goals than Will Grigg, because his set-piece delivery and whatever work they've done on the training ground in order to maximise that has been unbelievably important, which is, again, coming down to the playoffs where it's going to be fine margins. If they can, it's probably an unsustainable rate at which they're scoring set-piece goals, but it could be huge.
Underlying numbers-wise for Pompey, Nick, we know that Sunderland struggled to win the XG battle and to project well on that side of things. Were Portsmouth way better than that? It feels just anecdotally to me, and thinking back to games, that they haven't been sort of the team to blow other teams away either. No,
they haven't. The interesting and weird thing with Portsmouth was they had that 2-month run, didn't they, where they didn't win I don't think they won a league game over 2 months. Yeah. And early in the season, they were winning games without looking like Luton. They were grinding it out, and you thought they were grinding their way to promotion, as with Jackett sort of almost forcing them up using his wily know-how to get their job done, which you never thought about Sunderland. And they came. So that 2-month spell that when it arrived, it was almost like, I'm not too shocked about this, because the signs were there that Portsmouth and Sunderland weren't miles better than the rest of the division anyway, and then it came to pass. But then they came out the other side of that.
8 wins in a row.
Yeah, and they've been pretty good since. But the point about Sunderland, I thought the Will Grigg signing smacked of desperation a little bit, to be honest. I thought the way they had to go back in with more money late on and get it over the line. If you got league points for names on a team sheet, they'd have won the league. But you don't, obviously. And we've got 46 games worth of data and match video that says Sunderland aren't that good a team. And I think if you can, the games, the tie's been priced almost each of 2. I think Portsmouth are slightly better. And if you go, so that final at Wembley, Sunderland were the better side first half, but from there Portsmouth took control. And the league game at Stadium of Light recently, for me, Portsmouth are the better side, even away from home. I think Portsmouth should be favourites for this tie, and I'll be backing them to qualify, which I think you can get around evens.
Okay, so let's sum up where we stand for both ties, where we lean. I think it's it's clear that that game is going to be quite tight, quite tense. Unlikely that either side will blitz the other. So, Nick, you're going with Portsmouth in that game.
And I'm going to take, purely on the grounds of value, I think Charlton should be favourites, but slight favourites. I'm going to take a surprise in the other game. I'll go for a Portsmouth-Donny final, which Pompey win.
Pompey up to the Championship. What about you, Paul? Who do you think will be contesting the League One playoff final at Wembley, and who do you think will make it out of that?
I'm going to go Portsmouth versus Charlton. Who's going to win that? Does the fact that Portsmouth have played there, had success there this season, does that give them the edge? At the minute, I'd have to go Charlton.
All right,
to win all the games.
Yeah, I'm going to go Charlton, Pompey, and I'm going to pick Charlton as well. They match up pretty well, I think, to this Portsmouth team, and they've got a very good record against them in the regular season. So Charlton for me. What about you, George?
Well, yeah, the odds: Portsmouth 11-5, Charlton 5-2, Sunderland 13-5, Doncaster 4-1. I reckon Charlton to win a Charlton-Portsmouth final. This is my strongest bet, which is devastating to hear. Nick saying Donny's going to get through the semis, but yeah, I think at 5-2, just given that they've lost one game in the last 15, given they finished third, given they're taking on a team I think they can beat, and they've won 7 of their last 8. The game they lost was against Oxford, where they absolutely battered Oxford for the whole game and were very unlucky to lose. I think 5-2 is a knocking price, given that they're in the easy semi as well.
We got some brilliant players on show as well. So just for those listening who will be watching these games and who are hoping to get a steer on who to look out for, we had the same question from Tom about that basically who could make the most impact. Any key players you think could make a big impact? I mean, for Portsmouth, you've got someone like Jamal Lowe, who's been in great goal-scoring form. I've banged on about him quite a lot in the last month or so, but I want to flag up Christian Bielik at Charlton. Unfortunately for us, as EFL fans and followers, he's an Arsenal loanee, so it's unlikely. He could be in the Championship next season. But such is the level that he's played at since the turn of the year, and I think he's made the leap that loanees quite often make. He's just playing at an unbelievable level at the moment, and both defensively, he sits at the base of the diamond, and physically he's imposing. He wins his duels, and also stepping into midfield. I think in the last few weeks he's got a few assists. He scored on the weekend as well. He's an absolute wrecking ball, actually, in this Charlton midfield, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing how he gets on. Anyone else to add? Any players that have caught your eye?
I think if Sunderland are going to have any chance, you mentioned him, Aidan McGeady, has to turn up. He's a player that can make something happen out of nothing, score from distance, set plays, and I think he's going to have to turn up to give Sunderland the chance of getting to the final first and foremost, and then perhaps winning it.
And probably ought to give a mention to Johnny Williams. He's not a League One footballer, is he?
No.
That's a hell of a signing for them. He's too good to play in that league. I
think for anyone whose League One interest is normally just Netflix before the playoffs, we look out for him anyway. But anyone who's going to be watching this, who's coming into a bit blind, I think Joe Aribo is a player to really look out for, whose future is again not in League One. Been linked to Arsenal recently. Very athletic, very good on the ball, very skillful, plays well between the lines. He's a player that I think is destined for very good things.
So that's Aribo destined for higher than League One, Bielik going back to Arsenal, and who knows
They could be Arsenal together next season.
That's Johnny Williams, who Nick says is not a League One player, and Cullen, the fourth of the Diamond, who's on loan from West Ham. So there you go, a lot of quality in that Charlton midfield. Thank you so much for listening, guys. This has been the League One playoff preview sponsored by BlackType. If you're interested in the Championship and the League Two versions, they'll be available wherever you listen to or watched this. BlackType are offering a £10 free football selection for anyone who signs up using the offer code NTT20. So give BlackType a go with any of your fancies ahead of the playoffs. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you to all our guests for such excellent insight and expertise.